Greetings to everyone. Name's Marcus Dekener. I'm the chair of the Load Research Chapter. I suspect as I'm talking, more folks will arrive, but welcome to all of you. We contacted Shirley and we were trying to get a better insight into how tariffing is done in South Africa. And this is part of our efforts this year on our syllabus that the Load Research Chapter members have requested of us at the time that we formed. So I reached out to Shirley, and we are very fortunate that in spite of leaving Eskom to consult, she's still made herself available to the Load Research Chapter. We had a chat about the scoping, and I think Shirley is going to be gentle with you today because it could be much more complicated than she's going to make it. I just want to give you an intro into our speaker today. Shirley is an independent consultant with a BCom and an MSc in Engineering Business Management. She has more than 44 years' experience in the electricity industry, retiring from Eskom as a corporate specialist in 2024. Shirley was responsible for Eskom's electricity pricing policy, tariff design, and tariff plan submissions. She also provided inputs into various regulatory documents and the codes and NERSA consultation documents. She has represented Eskom in South Africa in various forums, webinars, conferences, and public hearings, and in the media related to, amongst others, tariff design and tariff plans, pricing strategies, dynamic pricing, wheeling, and wheeling policy. Shirley now consults to various industry role players on, amongst others, wheeling, Eskom tariffs, and the South African wholesale electricity market. So, folks, that is quite a mouthful, and today you have an undisputed expert at your disposal. Shirley is going to give us some insight, and then after about 40 minutes, we will have time for questions and discussions. So, Shirley, if you've got your presentation, please share.
Good afternoon, everyone. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know. But it's lovely to be able to share and talk a little bit about tariffs, because it is quite a complex subject. The important thing when designing a tariff, and this is at the highest, simplest level, is you need to know where you want to go. So you need to have a strategic direction. You need to set your objectives. What do you actually want to do with these tariffs? Where's your business going into in the future? So it's always important to have that. And there are guiding documents as well, like the electricity pricing policy of government. There's the tariff codes. There's NERSA own rules as well. And they all feed into your direction and the objectives. So, where do you want to go? Because you know that the market is changing. Then also you need to understand what your cost drivers are. So what is causing the cost, and what are the signals that you want to impart? So the voltage of supply is a driver, the location of the supply, the customer's usage and demand patterns, the size of the supply as well. Those are all drivers for costs. And then you structure your tariffs to balance the changing needs of your customer and your business. And customer needs are changing all the time. We know with solar in particular, the way the grid is being used, what are the risks the business is facing because of this? So how do you address that? So there's certain steps that is followed in tariff design, and the block on the right talks about James Bondbright, and he actually wrote this book, I think, in the 1960s, and the principles he put into this book are still actually applicable today. They need to be simple, understandable. There needs to be public acceptance. It needs to be feasible to apply it and to interpret it by customers. But we also know that that's not always possible, because the more cost-reflective a tariff is, the more complex it becomes. It needs to recover the revenue. It needs to ensure that revenue is stable from one year to the other. The rates themselves, the tariffs, you need to have minimal changes that could seriously adverse customers. So rather do them in a slower way. You need to apportion your costs in a fair way amongst your different consumers. You need to ensure that you don't introduce undue discrimination where you give a preferential treatment to one customer over another. And then how do you promote efficiency in the use of electricity and in competing products and services? So with that in mind, the steps in tariff design is firstly done starting with an approved revenue requirement. So tariffs are designed separate from the revenue requirement. The revenue requirement is a regulatory formula such as the NYPD, which looks at costs plus return equals your revenue. And that is a decision that the regulator would make where the company is a monopoly, such as Eskom. So Eskom submits its applications to the regulator based on all its cost items separately for generation, the transmission or the NTCSA, and for distribution. And then NERSA throws it all together and gives an average price increase. But it firstly approves a revenue. Out of that becomes the average price increase. Then if you want to restructure your tariffs, so not just apply the average price increase to all the tariffs that you have, you now want to restructure them, you do a cost of supply or cost of service study. Those two terms get used interchangeably. This is not a cost justification process. That happens in the NYPD. And that's an allocation exercise where you allocate these already approved costs based on your cost drivers. And I'll go into that in the next few slides. And out of that, you get cost reflective unit rates. Those are not necessarily the tariffs that get applied to the customers. So once this cost of supply study is done, that feeds into the tariff design process, because now you know for your tariffs, and typically, if I talk how Eskom did it or does it, is they would allocate the costs based on the voltage of the customer, where the customer is located, and then those costs start to get pooled into the existing tariff categories. You can create new tariff categories if you want to, but they would typically get pooled. So the costs for each tariff gets pooled into a tariff design model. And this always starts with the science of it. The science of it is this is what the cost of supply study says the costs must be. But sometimes you might want to introduce signals. You might want to introduce some strategy. So even though the costs are saying this is what it is right now, in the future, I want customers to use my grid in a slightly different way. So I'm going to start to introduce some signals. At the end of the day, though, all the changes or everything you do has to come back to the revenue requirements. So that is the art part of it. And in theory, actually, time of use is kind of the art part of it, because it takes really what the system operator wants people to use the grid. Now, the time of use tariffs are actually an input into the cost of supply study, because that's what, for example, Eskom distribution buys at from the NTCSA. Then the last part of tariffs is the politics. And that's where customers don't like what you're doing, or the government says, don't introduce this new charge, it's going to impact customers. You can see that in the Munich space, where municipalities have introduced a charge and then it gets removed because the constituents have not liked what was introduced. And that also is where, when you've done your tariff changes and you see, oh, so many customers are going to be paying in numbers a lot more, and there's a whole lot that's going to be saving. I want to smooth that out so that there's not such big impacts to these customers. So then you do some adjustments in your tariffs. So that's really at a high level the tariff design process. Yeah. So what are the cost drivers when you're looking at allocating costs and recovering that through the tariffs? Firstly, you've got your energy, which is typically in kilowatt hours, even though Eskom now, and I'm going to touch on it, has split the energy into 3 components. 2 of them kilowatt hours and 1 of them based on kVA. But that's typically your wholesale purchase cost. So it's what you pay for buying that energy, and the basis of allocation is looking at the time of use profile. So for customers where you actually have time of use data, you would use that data as is. And for customers where you don't have time of use data, you will use load research information, which I know Marcus was involved in a lot of that kind of work for Eskom, typically for residential customers. Then you've got losses, which are kilowatt hour based, even though they are actually network costs. And this is based on the location. So the voltage and the geographic zone. Geographic zone for transmission losses and voltage for distribution losses. The lower the voltage, the higher the losses. Then you've got ancillary services, which is a part of your wholesale cost. And this could be kilowatt hours or kVA. For example, Eskom at the moment is still kilowatt hours, but there is talk that, the NTCSA, there is talk that they still convert to kVA. And that is also based on voltage or the demand, depending on if it's kVA or kilowatt hours. Then you've got demand itself, your capacity, and that's the cost of capacity installed. And now the cost driver that had to be included in the latest Eskom cost of supply study included your distribution network costs, your transmission network costs, but a portion of generation costs was also based or allocated on the basis of demand. And demand uses quite complex formulas in the cost of supply study, where they look at the average demand and the peak demand. They use statistical formula called the average and excess method and Barry curves and all kinds of things in order to allocate the demand that customers pay. It looks at diversity, all kinds of things. So a residential customer's demand will comprise the demand that sits at their voltage level, and then the diversified demand upstream up to the transmission system, and then based on the average and excess method and the Barry curves. Then, and don't ask me questions about the average and excess and Barry curves. I'm not a fundi on it, but it's quite interesting for those of you that do statistics. So, and then you've got your retail charges, and this is your cost of administration and customer services, and this is based typically on the size of the supply. So it's allocated on the size. Much larger supplies, like a key customer gets individualized service, their service and admin charges will be higher than a residential customer. So what are the causes of the cost and what is the basis of the allocation is important when you're doing a cost of supply study. So why is it actually important to have correctly structured tariffs? Firstly, good tariff design provides the correct economic signals, but it also will look at affordability and whether customers can respond to the signals provided. So to put a customer that's using 100 kilowatt hours a month on a very complex tariff at time of use when they have no ability to respond to it, doesn't really make sense. The cost of doing that for that customer also doesn't make sense. The energy transition is now creating new cost drivers as well. You're now not having the grid just being supplying electricity one way or really developed just for loads. It's now having to look at both loads and generation. And this is introducing the concept of the grid having to be there as a backup, generation having to be there as a backup. So there are new cost drivers that are being created. Tariff design and tariff structures must focus on better allocating costs and unbundling these costs as far as possible in order for the tariffs to be cost reflective. And this is to ensure that customers get tariffs based on how they actually contribute to these costs, the principle of cost causality. So if I only use the grid once in a blue moon and it's there as a backup, the transformers are still there, the network is still there, but I'm actually not contributing to it, which means my neighbor now has to contribute to it. So that is a fairness issue, and I'm going to touch on that as well in the past, in a few slides. So leading into that, in the past, you could have had tariffs that were just cents per kilowatt hour based because you knew what most people were going to consume. It was pretty static. And all the energy flowed from large generators to the customer, and you could manage this. Or for larger customers, you could have had a demand component as well. This is no longer applicable. Firstly, the time electricity is used is important. If you are consuming electricity in a peak time when the cost of generation is more expensive, sorry, did somebody want to say something? Okay.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
No problem. I thought it was a question. So the time electricity is used is becoming more and more important. In particular, also because of the increased own generation and IPPs. It's this generation is now providing a lot of energy on the grid in the middle of the day, but not necessarily at night unless there's storage. So and also your demand or your grid as a backup. So it's no longer appropriate to cover, in particular, fixed costs through kilowatt hour charges. So these tariff charges now need to be modernized. Increased signals for when electricity is used. It needs to cover the cost of capacity for the fact that there's a backup. This is to minimize system and network costs and to ensure fair recovery of revenue, and also to allow customers to save if they can actually respond to these signals. So if a customer can use their battery to offset peak usage, this benefits both Eskom, the system operator, and it also benefits the customer. So customers don't necessarily like more and more complex tariffs, but I know people that have got PV systems installed. I don't have yet, but that have got PV systems installed. These are people that hardly knew anything about electricity. They now have their app, and they are managing their household like they are like a pro, because of their PV system and battery. So just imagine if you now have time of use signals, it just increases the way that you can actually manage your PV system and battery. Oh, okay, so this is leading now into this fixed versus variable costs and recovery and tariffs, which is, by the way, a massive discussion everywhere in the world with tariff designers and economists and customers not liking what is being mooted as a challenge. So let's look at just Eskom. A very large portion of Eskom costs are fixed. Most of transmission and distribution is fixed. The networks exist. Whether a kilowatt hour goes over that network or not, The transformers are there to supply it. The substations are there. They're fixed. And about 70% of generation is also fixed. The buildings, the infrastructure that exists. The variable portion is really your fuel and your water costs. So again, if a tariff recovers the fixed costs as a variable cents per kilowatt hour charge, and there's a consumption reduction, the costs don't reduce because of that. If there's lower consumption, it leads to an under recovery of revenue. And that under recovery of revenue needs to be caught up through future price increases. And this just adds to the utility death spiral, because now you're going to increase the tariffs for everybody else because you've lost revenue. Now it makes it more a great incentive for me now to and I'm not going to talk about off-grid where you disconnect from your Eskom supply, but it creates a great incentive now for me to install PV, and I don't make my fair contribution to the fixed cost, so the tariff has to increase. And this just is really fundamentally the utility death spiral. So this graph basically shows the red line is your cost line, and your green line is your tariff. So, and this is typically if you have like a residential tariff, which is a fixed charge and a variable charge, you would have a break even for the average customer. So the average customer, there's a break even between cost and revenue, and the higher consumption customers pay a subsidy, and the lower consumption customers receive a subsidy. But it's these higher consumption customers that are the ones that are now installing PV. And I'm picking on PV, but it's just to give a concept. So what, I mean, even energy efficiency could create the same thing. They were paying a subsidy, but now they move into the block where they're actually receiving the subsidies. So, and somebody has to pay for that. You know, there's no reserve fund to pay for this. It needs to be recovered from somebody. So as this consumption reduces, the customer starts to get subsidized. So what you need to do now is you need to actually align your tariff so that it sits on that red line, which means your fixed charges go up and your variable charges reduce. That's where you would have a cost-reflective tariff structure. And the grid and the capacity-based generation has to be on standby when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, or you've had a few days of very bad weather, etc. So it is appropriate to increase fixed charges, but in order, if Eskom had to go and make 70% of generation cost fixed, it would mean that most people, it would make more economic sense to go totally off-grid. The cost of batteries would be cheaper than to pay this significantly high fixed charge. So there needs to be a balance between what are the unintended consequences of going 100% cost reflective in terms of fixed and variable. What this does mean is it passes all the risk onto the customer and the utility sits with no risk. Now, what is important in this discussion is all of these tariffs are based on volume, and volume is kilowatt hours, demand, and number of customers. So forecasting becomes integral in order to calculate your tariffs correctly, because the regulator bases the price increase on your volumes, revenue divided by volume. If you get the volumes wrong, you under recover or you can over recover. If you over recover, the regulator can take it away from you. If you under recover, you have to go to the regulator and ask them for the money for that under recovery, and you're not guaranteed you're going to get it. So this is why forecasting is very important, and forecasting is becoming more and more complex as more and more RPPs and on-site generation gets added. So what is an electricity tariff structures? They're the rates that are raised on the electricity bill, and tariff structure is made up of these different charges. Some are simple, some are more complex, like the megaflex. And the more complex, the more unbundled the tariff is. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but in the draft electricity pricing policy, it states that tariffs need to be unbundled as far as possible, energy costs, and it included the generation capacity charge, which I'm going to touch on in the next few slides. Transmission costs, reflecting transmission purchases, distribution, network charges based on demand, or rand per kilowatts or rand per amp per month. Customer services charge based on rand per point of delivery, admin charge based on point of delivery, charges for poor power factor, a time of use, energy net billing rate for prosumers, and that's a new thing that has been introduced by NERSA, even though Eskom's had it for quite a while. Charges for losses, and then also it mentions, for ease of understanding, you're not necessarily going to have all of these components depending on the customer that's been served. Okay, so what did NERSA approve for Eskom for 25-26? Eskom submitted a tariff plan in 2024. It was the third one, and the only in the last 6 years. The first two NERSA didn't approve, or the first one they didn't even look at. So what NERSA approved, and I think most of you are aware, Eskom, if you look at the Megaflex tariff, the Megaflex tariff is a cents per kilowatt hour based tariff in peak, standard, and off-peak, winter and summer. What was approved is that energy charge got unbundled into 3 charges: a time of use, active energy charge, a fixed generation capacity charge based on rand per kVA and the notified maximum demand, and a legacy charge. And the legacy charge pulled out the cost of the government procurement programs and is charging it as an explicit rate. One of the reasons that was done is because in a wheeling transaction, the customers buying wheeled energy could avoid contributing to the Section 34 IPPs. And Eskom's argument was, this is a social program, everybody in the country needs to pay. It's government mandated. So that impact has impacted customers that are wheeling energy because it reduced their benefits. Then the time of use changes. There was time of use period changes. So the time of use graph at the bottom, on the left-hand side is the current, and the right-hand side is the proposed. And what happened was 1 hour of peak in the morning was shifted to an hour of peak in the evening. So the evening peak increased and the morning peak periods reduced. And then there was also a standard period introduced on a Sunday. By the way, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, the time of use profile is almost exactly the same. So I do foresee that Eskom over time is going to increase the peak periods on Saturdays and Sundays, or introduce peak periods on Saturdays and Sundays as well. And then there was also a ratio change where the winter rates were reduced slightly and the summer rates were increased commensurately. For residential tariffs, NERSA approved the removal of the inclining block rate tariff, a tariff I absolutely hated. This was a tariff that NERSA actually introduced. Eskom used to have for residential tariffs, or for home power, a fixed charge and a variable charge. and then they basically took the fixed charge away and just had the inclining block rate. Eskom managed afterwards to get a small fixed charge included, but now the residential tariffs have higher fixed charges, and they introduced this generation capacity charge as a fixed charge, and also for home flex, the energy charge was converted to, well, it is a time of use tariff. The charges for home power and home flex, the fixed charges are the same. There's no difference. It's just home flex is time of use. So this was based on an updated cost of supply study. NERSA approved basically everything Eskom asked for, except for the generation capacity charge. That was based on 7% of generation costs being fixed. NERSA reduced it to about 1.4%. I think for home power 4, it's about 47 cents a kVA. Okay, 47 cents a day. Eskom also has net billing tariffs and wheeling tariffs, where there's compensation for energy exported onto the grid, and generators also pay for use of system based on a maximum export capacity. So Megaflex has got a time of use energy charge. It's got a rand per kVA generation capacity charge based on NMD and voltage. There's a variable cents per kilowatt hour legacy charge. There are transmission network charges covering the cost of purchasing the service from the NTCSA, and that's based on voltage and transmission zone. There's a variable ancillary service charge. There's a rand per kVA network demand charge based on the maximum demand in a month. And then there's a fixed network capacity charge based on notified maximum demand. And that's a fixed charge over 12 months. Then there's the cents per kilowatt hour affordability and rural and electrification subsidy charges. There's an urban low voltage subsidy charge based on voltage. So there's 3 subsidy components in the Megaflex tariff, where they contribute to other tariffs or other customer categories who get tariffs that are lower than cost. And then there's a fixed rand per day service and admin charge based on the size of supply. I do get questions on how Munix will determine their tariffs. So Munix, obviously, their purchase cost is based on what they buy from Eskom, and Eskom has gone and combined all the municipal tariffs into 3 categories: a Munich Flex version, a Munich Rate version for the small power, and public lighting. So what Eskom did is it took all the tariffs that municipalities pay, Megaflex, Miniflex, NightSave, Ruralflex, NightSave Rural, combined them into one category and now has one tariff. So they are going to be purchasing electricity from Eskom based on this new structure. It's based on the Megaflex structure that I just showed you. And they are going to have to update their cost of supply studies and make a decision on how they're going to pass those costs onto their customers. So are they going to restructure their tariffs to align with what Eskom has changed? So some suggestions were they need to move away from inclining block rate tariffs. They need to unbundle their network charges and their network and retail costs into separate wires and retail services. They need to reflect in their tariffs, and they need to introduce time of use tariffs as much as possible for those that haven't, that align with the way that they're buying energy from Eskom. Okay, this is just dealing with subsidies in electricity tariffs, and it's just saying, if you're looking at the graph on the right-hand side, the top line is the tariff paid by the consumer contributing to the subsidies. The blue line at the bottom is the tariff paid by customers that receive a subsidy. So that subsidy received has to be recovered elsewhere from other customers. And that's all sits within the electricity space. Somebody has to pay for it. The problem is there's no real national tariff subsidy framework, and this is a big question mark in the industry. Is like, why do I have to pay for these subsidies? And then also municipalities raise surcharges, and those aren't always transparent. But it is something that you have to deal with when you do tariff design. So the way the grid is used is changing, and the way it impacts tariffs and forecasting is a work in progress. So the energy was supplied by large generations to load. The grid now needs to accommodate two-way flows. These flows are not always consistent or flexible unless you have storage. So forecasting starts to become more difficult. So what Eskom is doing, for example, all generators are now having to provide a 3-year forecast like loads were doing as well. And in the future, there's also going to be balancing mechanisms in the wholesale, where customers will have to forecast day ahead. So designing tariffs and allocating costs happens in an uncertain environment, and it's changing the cost drivers. It's impacting how grid planning and operations is done, what happens during peak load periods and time of renewable electricity. And I don't know if you guys were listening to what happened in Spain, where there were all kinds of theories around what actually happened. So tariff design has to be modernized to take all of this into account, and the issue of fixed and variable has to be well managed, not to penalize customers too severely, but to ensure that there's adequate cost recovery. So tariffs are going to become more complex. Forecasting is going to need to be much more sophisticated for both loads and generators, and customer responses to the tariffs are better understood, because we know customers do respond to the time of use tariff. So Eskom is now increasing this obligation on customers, both generators and load, on the forecasting side. And the introduction of the South African wholesale markets and allowing generators and customers to purchase in the market is also going to change the dynamic of tariffs going forward. Customers will have to give day-ahead forecasts, and if they for example, generate less than they forecast, they could incur penalties. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but just so that you are aware, there's a wholesale electricity market that is proposed to be introduced from the 1st of April next year. It's based on a code which is in the process of being developed. It will start with Eskom generation, the Section 34 IPPs, or the government procurement IPPs, and Eskom distribution buying and selling in this platform, and then increasingly more market participants will be able to buy and sell through the market. And there's a number of different platforms that in future will be added, such as a capacity market. So just an introduction, and that is also going to change the way tariffs are going to be designed in the future. I think that's the last slide.
Thank you very much, Shirley. That was quite a mouthful, and I don't think being involved in the load research, I don't think we've appreciated how kind of detailed the environment has become with the breakdown of the unbundling, or the breakdown of the various costs. The fixed, the variable, and the upstream stuff cascading down. I just have one question with, and then I can open the floor to the others. just from your point of view, would you say that the environment for tariff designers is becoming more intense in a way, because there are now several more rows of knobs that can be turned and debated on the various forums?
Definitely. So just one of the aspects, for example, the cost of supply study that Eskom has, or sort of is pretty, if you go to read up any cost of supply study, it sort of typically follows the same approach, is 100% aligned around loads. There is no cost of supply study for generators and how they are impacting the grid, except transmission has a cost of supply study where they look at load flows and all kinds of fancy things on the transmission system. But the transmission system is simpler because there's not thousands and thousands of generators that sit on the transmission system. All big generators, you can actually look at each one of them individually and calculate sort of a cost signal, or and get cost signals out of it. But for distribution, it's increasingly complex. Now the question, of course, is okay, should just you make the loads pay for use of the network, and generators pay nothing? That's not necessarily the right signal. And transmission, for example, they created signals around where they wanted generators to be. Now, obviously, all those generators have gone into those areas, and now they no longer have capacity, and they've got increased losses and so on. So the environment is becoming more complex. Eskom distribution, at the time I left, was doing trying to develop a cost of supply study for generators. I don't know how far they are, and that's going to be interesting to work out, like, what was the data that they used. All of this relies on data, and what was the data that they used. So yes, Marcus, it's getting increasingly more and more complex, where 20 years ago, a kilowatt hour, the large customer had 1 kilowatt hour charge and 1 demand charge. That doesn't provide the right signals anymore.
Thank you, Shirley. Folks around the table, if you've got a question, please put up your hand. I suggest you turn on your video, and Shirley, you're welcome to turn on your video to respond. Folks around the table, we've got probably one of the foremost tariffing people in South Africa at your fingertips. Please feel free to ask questions. Hands up, please. Lungisi, you're first up. Please switch on your camera. Shirley, yourself as well, and let's see what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lungi Sokanyile. Thank you so much, Shirley, for your presentation. I don't think I have a question, but really just to say it was very insightful. And I think what I was most pleased with is you confirming how tricky it is to get a fully cost-reflective tariff, especially without either hurting your client or rather the municipality in my case, versus hurting your the customer. So I really just want to say thank you for that, because it's so hard to explain that to the client, because their mandate is to get fully cost-reflective tariffs. And when you try to explain to them how difficult it is, or rather how it looks as in the end, it doesn't really sit well. So I was really happy to hear someone else say it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Jana, I see you have hand up.
Yeah, I have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, Marcus. Hi, Shirley. Thanks for the presentation. I think this is a very important topic, and I think it's one that's very understated. And yes, exactly, explaining in a way that the customers do understand it. It's the same. You see all these headlines going, people getting penalized for putting up solar and so forth. So they're not understanding the way the business runs. They're not, I'm part of the, sorry, for anyone else, I'm heading up the transmission demand forecast, which is based on the capacity. And that just shows you all the way where we still need to put in the overheads. And you have that basic cost of servicing your customer, whether they use your energy or not, you still have that base cover. So it's very important that the tariff is structured correctly. And then I do concur that it is a tremendous, complicated area that we're moving in. And then, yes, everything is based on data. And unfortunately, we don't have enough data. And a lot of that is to do with trying to incentivize implementation of some renewables and rooftop PV, for instance, where you don't have to register specifically. So from a data perspective, it's so difficult to actually do all the proper analysis. So with that, I do agree. That is a very difficult task, and we need to we currently creating methodologies to understand where the PV is in the country and where it has an impact on a grid connection, because a lot of people also tend to talk about going off grid, but they're not off grid, they're grid tied. And that makes this whole tariff thing even more explicit. So what I wanted to just then ask you from a forecasting point of view, would you say the next tariff increase would be the next wave of implementing the rooftop PV? Because from our side, we looked at an exponential increase in rooftop PV implementation onto the different areas of the network, which is difficult to pinpoint because it's not registered. It's every household or commercial buildings and so forth, and very little of them have 100 megawatts to register. But they popped up quite frequently, and from an Eskom point of view, Network Ops, they calculated it to be up to about 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity. Of which most of it was installed prior to, or past 2023 and 24. And what we've seen on the network was interesting because we actually saw a constant lowering of demand throughout 2024, even though we did not have any load shedding. And that just tells, from a logical point of view, it tells us that there is some implementation of rooftop PV that is lowering the demand, where these customers are still using what they've put in place. So I was just asking myself, so basically the first wave was mostly driven by load shedding. I'm asking myself, would the next wave be driven by the tariff increase?
Yes, I think so. I know with there was work done with NECOM, and one of the things that they picked up is, load shedding was number one. That's what increased it. And I think a lot of people, even in 24, even though there wasn't load shedding, they had already made commitments to buy and things like that. But it's the two. Well, it's the two. I've got a brother-in-law that's decided to go off grid. He's gone off grid, and he's gone off grid because he doesn't want to register. It's like sticking, his middle finger to the bureaucrat. So it's. I think everybody is doing it not always for the same reasons, but load shedding and price increases, definitely. It starts to make things more economical. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, y'all. So more of a comment on my side, but thank you for your contribution.
No, thanks for the comment.
Thanks, Jana. Maputi, you've got your hand up. You next.
Yes, thank you so much. And also thank you, Shirley, for such a wonderful presentation. I think not a lot of people always realize the importance of understanding tariffs and their impact on not just the electricity business, but to customers and everything. And also just to agree with Jana's point about data and all of that, having done a few cost of supply studies, we start to realize that missing data is a huge thing. And with the recommendations made, like moving towards time of use tariffs and all of that, and you start to realize, particularly at municipal level, they don't monitor time of use, particularly for residential customers. It becomes very difficult to then develop tariffs based on that. But what I wanted to ask you, Shirley, is what are your thoughts in terms of the National Energy Regulator's role in assisting, particularly with municipalities, when they try to develop tariffs and having conducted cost of supply studies, what their role is in getting to these cost reflective tariffs. Because a lot of the questions I've heard from clients where we've done cost of supply studies is you do one in one financial year. And then unfortunately, due to the processes and the overviews on NERSA's side, it might take a year or 2 or even 3 years to finally get it approved. And then at that point, a couple of financial years have passed. And then the municipality says, well, we've experienced changes. There's exponential growth in SSEG within the grid. They've got new financial items that are included in terms of the expenditure for their revenue requirement. Then it's, do we redo the study and continue? You know, that those types of elements, like at what point do we then think of having more dynamic type of cost of supply studies done, maybe once every 2 years or once a year? And just essentially NERSA's role in facilitating this for particularly municipalities.
So I think the whole way the tariffs are done at the moment is not efficient. You know, it just it's not efficient. I mean, Eskom has to wait for a revenue decision, and only after the revenue decision do its tariffs, and the Munichs try and do their revenue and the tariffs together. Typically, their cost of supply includes a revenue component. So, you know, I want to increase and I want to restructure my tariffs. And it's not flexible. I 100% agree with you. And also, if you think NERSA having to do like, I don't know, 180 cost of supply studies where just Eskom's alone took them almost 6 months to look at. So, you know, if I look at what other regulators have done, for example, Ofgem, they have a standard template. Okay, it's distributors in particular, but the distributors populate this template, and it's a template the regulators developed, gets populated, and out of that pops the tariffs. You know, so the revenue, and then obviously if there's structural changes, they can make proposals on that. But it's not dynamic, and it's going to be when the wholesale market comes in, it's going to be even more difficult because the distributors are going to have to forecast a year ahead on what they think, which they do anyway, but what they think the system marginal price is going to do. So I don't have a solution other than recognizing the problem. I think the industry needs to work on how to do this much quicker. Standard templates, standard information. Basically, all you do is you update the cost, you update the volumes, and you can then do structural changes on that, and maybe all get done at the same time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Shirley. And
where are you from, Maputi?
Oh no, so I'm from South Africa. I'm just in Dublin at the moment.
No, what I mean is, who have you done?
Cost of supply studies for. Greater Tsanin, Bito local municipality. Yeah, those are the two.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Maputi. Okay, Shirley, so you've raised an important point. Does NERSA have the capacity to adjudicate 180 cost of supply studies? That's an interesting one. So it looks like as we get more into the cost of supply study and it becomes standardized, the efficiencies might pick up. Yes. Sharon, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me just put on my camera. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shirley, for the masterclass. It was very informative. Really appreciate it. My question is around the wholesale market, right, which you've touched on it. I'm just wondering that, in the document, the South African wholesale market specification that I think was published, they do mention that there will be a need to, for the tariff unbundling, right, process it and for the wholesale market to sort of create a legacy charge that would go with that. So I'm just wondering, what is the progress, given that, the target is the 1st of April 2026, which is next year. So I'm just wondering, what are the activities that are happening around that, getting to working around the legacy charges, all the processes that need to go into coming up with that legacy charge and really getting ready for the wholesale market. Are there any activities that are happening right now? What is the progress on that? Thank you.
Yes. So through NECOM, the market code is, they are, what's the right word? It's not sponsoring, but there's a whole lot of work that's actually been done through NECOM and the NTCSA on the market code. So there was a whole lot of, and you probably might have listened to a few of them, but there was a whole lot of workshops that were given through the year. So the current status is that they first have to go get a market license, and that's in the process. And then the market code document, after all the inputs that were received, is going to be shared shortly. And then it's going to go, after the license, it's going to go to NERSA. Then on top of that, there needs to be a wholesale tariff, let's say, set of rules that NERSA is going to have to approve. And the wholesale tariff would be comprised of the transmission network charges, the contributions to subsidies, the generation capacity charge, and the legacy charge. So Eskom has already introduced at the tariff level a legacy charge. It's recovering the cost of the government procurement programs. In future, that legacy charge is also, it's going to be a kind of a hedge for Eskom distribution and for the REAP projects. So the REAP projects will get paid what the system marginal price is, and the difference will be dealt with through the legacy charge. There's some challenges around that because the legacy charge will change every month. So, and that of course is not built into the flexibility of tariffs at the moment. So as far as I know, it's still 1 April 2026. It will start with at least Eskom generation, the government procurement programs, and Eskom distribution. And by the way, there is a kind of pseudo market already happening within Eskom. Opening it up to other participants, hopefully that will happen as soon as those participants qualify. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So hopefully soon there will be an update of the code itself that we'd be able to look at. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Corin, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Thanks.
Greetings.
Thanks, Shirley.
Are you in your beautiful wooden house?
Yes, we are. I don't know if you can see my video. I actually switched it on, but I can't see it myself.
I can. Marcus, just for your information, I've been to that house. I know Corin.
Yeah, I know she's a prepper.
Yes. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Back to the question.
Yes.
You know, with the public always thinks that the cost of renewable energy is low, but how do they actually bring in the cost of the inertia, extra costs for inertia, and the extra costs for the spinning reserves, extra spinning reserve needed, and so on? How do they actually bring that into the tariffs and to the cost studies? I know that's probably a whole new topic, but yeah, if you could maybe just touch on it. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting. Thanks.
Pleasure. I mean, that's a very, very good question to ask. And yes, renewable energy provides energy. It doesn't provide inertia. It doesn't necessarily provide the support that the grid needs. And that will typically be done through ancillary services. So what is going to happen, a lot of that ancillary service is actually hidden at the moment. Eskom generation provides a lot of that. through reserves, and so on. And going into the future, the market operator is going to have to procure those services. So they will actually have to pay people to provide that additional grid support, let's call it that, or system support. And so that's one of the markets as well that is going to develop. It's the ancillary services market, really, because ancillary services is for the reliability of the grid. And yeah, I think one of the things I said in Spain was the fact that there were too many non-synchronous machines on the system, which is renewable. Yeah, excellent point. The renewables provide only energy. And yeah, so you are going to need more generation or facilities that can provide the additional support that's needed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've run out of hands up. If anybody's got any further questions, you're welcome to ask now. We're in the last round, last 5 minutes. Okay, Wayne, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Shirley. It was a really informative talk. When you mentioned the cost of supply studies, you mentioned you mentioned losses. Do you take into account both technical and non-technical losses, or only technical losses? And then how do you account for either administrative problems or problems of electricity theft?
So the cost of supply study looks only at technical losses. So it uses, let's say, a generic network or a typical Eskom network, and it calculates the cost of losses. It is done slightly more scientifically than I've explained. The cost of non-technical losses are typically capped by the regulator. So the regulator won't allow you to, if you say your losses are 20%, the regulator will say, I'll only let you recover 10% losses. So if you purchase 100 from transmission and you sell 90, you can recover the cost of the 10%. But if it's like 80 or 70, the regulator can actually cap that. So the losses that sit in the cost of supply study are technical losses. The losses that are non-technical are actually dealt with through the revenue requirement.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Any last questions? I have one for myself, but the audience comes first. Any further questions from yourselves? I see Lolo's with us. Welcome, Lolo. Okay, just looking for hands. Back in the same screen. Shirley, my question is almost a question of opinion. What would you say the major driver of the municipal death spiral is in your experience? You've dealt with a number of municipalities, and you are walking and talking in the industry. It would be interesting just to get that opinion. Thanks.
Ooh, it's a tough question to ask.
Sorry, it's not a loaded question. I just
yeah.
It's just more about finding out more. Thanks.
I think probably skills. And if we're looking at it in the tariff space, I don't think there's many skills. They are relying a lot on external consultants, for example, to do cost of supply studies and the system with tariffs. And as you see, it's a complex thing. So I think there's a skills issue. I think not good management of revenue. I think affordability is another big problem.
Let me just, sorry, if I could just interject. By death spiral, I mean running out of money. That it's the economic or the financial. Sorry, just carry on, please.
Running out of money is maybe because they It's all those things that I just mentioned. They're sitting with a similar problem, I suppose, to Eskom, as you increase prices, you do introduce the concept of the death spiral, because as tariffs go higher, people make alternative choices or decide not to pay. That's a big problem. If you're not getting paid for the service you're providing. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Maybe I'm not understanding it.
No, it was more a find out what's going on question, and you've addressed it very well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I see Mike Barker's just joined us. Mike, this is your last chance to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Marcus. Hi, Shirley. I've just got a little weird question, if you don't mind. It concerns the night saver time of use tariff. When I looked at your documents, the time of use is shown to be between 2200 at night and 6 in the morning. But then when I looked at the actual tariffs in table 15, for example, night saver, rural, local, non-local authority, there's no mention of the time. That document speaks only about the high about the high demand season, low demand season. So yeah, if you have any comments on that, thank you.
Firstly, I don't work for Eskom, and secondly, Marcus has got my email, or you can send me the query, and I'll forward it on to my Eskom colleagues to answer that. I don't know. To me, it should have a time of use in it. I don't understand why it's not. Okay, so I think.
Thanks, Shirley. My apologies.
No problem. Yeah, I'd need to look at what the schedule is saying. That does seem strange. But yeah, if you send it to me, I can send it on to my ex-colleagues to respond to.
Great, okay. Thanks so much.
I just want to mention as well, as you said, Lola has joined. So Lola obviously does all the cost of supply studies and the tariff work for transmission network charges. So if you have any questions on that, you can ask him. Thanks.
Thank you, Shirley. And Lola, it's good to see you here. You're most welcome to comment or pitch in. It's open. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I have nothing to
add. An innocent bystander. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So, Shirley, it falls to me to then thank you very much for your presentation. And there were very good questions. And I think I will forsake my last question and let you return to productive endeavors. But thank you very much for pushing ignorance back a little bit. And that is it from our side. I very much appreciate your effort and your preparation for this and your willingness to speak to Load Research Chapter. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks for all the good questions.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.